I think the corporate graveyard is filling up with companies that haven't recognized that. Companies that were household brands, 10 years ago, some of them don't exist today. And yet there are other brands that didn't exist 10 years ago, and now they are global brands because they've adapted to change. So this is a huge topic. And I'm not suggesting, it's easy to adapt. But my point is, if you don't adapt, if you stand still, that's the most dangerous course of action. We have to adapt. There is no choice, or else we will enter that graveyard for corporates.
That was the voice of Professor Joe Nellis CBE. I'm Sarah Cole, founder of Cole Forums, a high-trust network for CEOs, general counsel and senior leaders. I'm the host of Insights from the Coalface, and through my podcast, private dinners and curated events, I bring together extraordinary leaders for honest, no-filter conversations that go far beyond the boardroom. Each episode features global experts, from neuroscientists and journalists to CEOs and ethicists, sharing bold lessons and practical strategies. We explore the science of trust and motivation, the power of communication, the role of ethical leadership, and how to balance high-stakes careers with a fulfilling life. Cole Forums creates the framework. You and your peers make the magic happen. Professor Joe Nellis CBE is a global economics expert and Cranfield's Deputy Dean, famed for making complex economics engaging and actionable. He's authored 19 books, advised governments, co-created the UK's major house price indexes, and helped rank Cranfield's economics group #1 worldwide. Joe's passion spans tech, demographics, and public policy, shaping real-world change. A marathon runner, golfer, and global citizen with deep ties to Ghana, his impact stretches far beyond academia. Awarded a CBE for services to education and business, Joe doesn't just teach economics, he lives it. Inspiring bold and brilliant, he's redefining what it means to be a modern economist. Welcome, Professor Nellis. How are you?
I'm fine, thanks, Sarah, on St. Patrick's Day.
I know, exciting. I wondered if we might just kick off with the elephant in the room. I mean, your CBE, how exciting was that?
It was a great honour and an incredible moment in my life. I never could have expected to receive a CBE. And I guess to a large extent, it reflects my 41 years at Cranfield, but also I hope it also reflects my work with in my work in Ghana. I was a VSO teacher in Ghana many, many years ago when I was a very young person, and I spent 2 years there, but I've been going back ever since. So a number of projects in Ghana. I just finished building a small nursery school, which is beautiful, by the way. But it's just been a very fortunate career, really.
If you go back to that time when you were in Ghana, I mean, obviously you've kept some enormous ties there. So what sort of impression did it make on you then? Why do you think it was so impactful?
Oh, a massive impression. I call Ghana my second home. I left Belfast, and you can imagine what it was like in the 70s, studying in Northern Ireland, and I'd never left Northern Ireland before. It was my first time on a plane. So I arrived in a remote part of Ghana, remote village in a secondary school that was setting up their A-levels for the first time. And the impact was immense. It was extreme poverty, but everybody was the same. So I thought this was normal, and I had to make ends meet. It probably has stuck with me all my life, unfortunately. But nevertheless, it gives me a sense of value. But most importantly, it was about the people. Ghana is a country where the people are very, very friendly. And it's a country where I feel very safe to go, any part of Ghana. But the people and the family values and making ends meet, all of that impacted my life. But also I noticed the hunger to learn. And it was wonderful. It was my first experience of teaching. And of course, I've been a teacher ever since. So it's been a life-changing experience, without a doubt.
Just on the teaching, I mean, it's a wonderful story, isn't it, really? Because it's sort of shaped who you are listening to
Correct.
you speak. Teaching will have changed enormously in the 40 years that you've been at Cranfield, and then maybe not. I don't know. Perhaps you could share a bit about that, really.
Oh, it has changed absolutely fundamentally. I remember, long before that, I remember writing computer programs when I was a student on little cards, and you fed these cards into a computer, and if one letter was wrong, the program failed. Uh, Technology has been the biggest change, of course, in my life. From electric typewriters, manual typewriters, electric typewriters, photocopiers. My goodness, I sound very old, but I mean, the technology, of course, has increased our productivity immensely, increased my productivity immensely. So now, I'm still enjoying my career at Cranfield, my work at Cranfield. But if I still had to mark exam papers by hand, I think I would have retired long ago. Now I give assignments, people submit online. I'm able to then give my reports back, but I dictate my reports using the voice recognition software. So I've loved the advancement of technology and the way it's transformed my experience of teaching and my enjoyment of teaching. So I can focus on, well, what I do best, which is talking to people. The typing is not what I do best. Otherwise, I'd be a typist. So yeah, I think those who've enjoyed the impact of technology in my profession have embraced change, and as a result, are still enjoying the challenges that are arising all the time.
Yeah, and just thinking for the leaders who'll be listening to this podcast, you talk a lot about the importance of adaptability. I mean, you wrote that article, "The World Beyond the Horizon," and you emphasize the importance of it. And it sounds from what you're saying that adaptability has just stood you personally in good stead as well, in the way that you've embraced technology change, all of that. Can you elaborate a little bit on why you think it's so crucial for leaders today to be adaptable?
Well, first of all, Sarah, you're absolutely right. I have adapted, but I haven't realized it because I've been part of the journey. And when you just said it, it made me realize, yeah, that's why I'm still enjoying myself. The 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 willingness, the keenness to adapt is fundamental. But going back to your question about business, look, let me say something that it's going to sound wrong, but I want to make an impact on those who are listening to this. I think the corporate graveyard is filling up very quickly today with companies that are not adapting to change. And technology is only one of those drivers of change. Change in competition, change in trading relationships, by the way, change in politics. I think adaptability is fundamental. And again, I don't want to say too many cliches, but past success is not a guarantee of future success. And as I said, I think the corporate graveyard is filling up with companies that haven't recognized that. Companies that were household brands, 10 years ago, some of them don't exist today. And yet there are other brands that didn't exist 10 years ago. And now they are global brands because they've adapted to change. So this is a huge topic. And I'm not suggesting, it's easy to adapt. But my point is, if you don't adapt, if you stand still, that's the most dangerous course of action. We have to adapt. There is no choice, or else we will enter that graveyard for corporates.
I think this is a hugely important topic. I agree. And I think you yourself have said many times that uh, the business environment, the sort of change speed that we can expect in the next 5 years will actually maybe exceed what we've experienced in the past 50. So, with that in mind, how can leaders prepare for such rapid transformations? Because they don't want to be in this graveyard, do they?
Yeah, it's a very difficult answer. A easy question, but difficult answer to provide. And the truth is, if I had the perfect answer, I wouldn't be here. I'd probably be on a yacht somewhere in the Caribbean. So let's first of all acknowledge that adapting and changing is difficult. This is not an easy subject. But at the very start, I think you have to ask the right questions. If you don't ask the right questions, you will never get the right answers. So the question should be, what's happening? Are we aware of what is happening? What I call the world beyond the horizon. Let me explain what I mean by that. What's coming, but we can't quite see it yet. What are the trends that are changing our business environment, but we're not yet thinking about these trends and how they will impact us? And there's one little framework, which I'm sure I'll mention several times during this discussion, that I use quite a lot. It's from a chap called Rolf and his colleagues. Rolf in 2001 developed a little reflective model to help us think through these types of questions. And the model is called What so what, and now what? So 3 simple questions. What's happening? Are you aware of that? So what? Are you aware of how what is coming towards you is going to impact you and your organization? And then, of course, now what? What are you doing to prepare for what is coming? Now, this sounds very simplistic, but sometimes the best reactions or the best decisions are the simplest ones, the most obvious ones. But there's lots of other things I'd like to add to that. You know, and again, I want to be provocative, but for constructive at the same time. Uh, Most of us probably feel most comfortable when we recruit people who look and think and behave like us. That we tend to reinvent ourselves when we recruit people, but that might be the very wrong thing to do, because if the world is changing, then our DNA has to change. We need to attract people who think differently, who look different from us, who behave different from us. Otherwise, we keep reinforcing the way we've always done things in the past. So I would ask everybody today who's listening to this, think about, what are you doing to change your DNA? Not for the sake of it, but to prepare for what is coming towards us.
So it's like stepping away from our comfort zone again, though, isn't it?
Absolutely, absolutely. And we all like comfort zones, by the way. I love comfort zones, I really do. But in the old days when I was young, we would call people who entered our organization who thought and behaved differently. We often called them cowboys. They don't fit. But actually, they may be the very people we need to bring into our organization to challenge the way we do things, the way we behave. Because otherwise, we will stand still. And that's the danger.
And it's even on a broader scale than that, isn't it? When you think about disruptors, like, I don't know, Uber off the top of my head, that was very uncomfortable for all of us initially because it was so new and transformative. I think, are you saying that we should actively then seek out people who are definitely not who we can relate to, if you like, on face of it? Because I think you're right. We look for people who kind of affirm our thoughts, don't we? Yeah, like-minded and all the rest of it. So you think this is crucial for an organization to grow and innovate, presumably?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say, eh, I would say actively recruit, but you have to recruit the right people. It's not just recruitment for the sake of it. For example, if you're running a computer software company, of course you need computer programmers, and you might even need accountants. You might even need economists. But how many of us would think of recruiting linguists, artists, musicians, because they tend to be the most creative people. And if you're trying to create change, if you're trying to create new ideas for your organization, you need creative people. And that's the point I'm trying to make. I know of one major computer company that actively recruits musicians, artists, and linguists for that very reason. So you need to be careful that you recruit people who are going to create value for you. And it's not just, being different for the sake of it. That's the point I'm trying to get across.
That makes more sense. I look, I've signed up for your update on the economy webinar series because my next question was going to be, how can businesses sort of actively or effectively analyze the things that are beyond the horizon? What tools can they use? And obviously, your webinar is one of them, but are there any others?
Well, Sarah, let me say it's actually very difficult to keep on top of everything that is happening. I do it full time and I find it very difficult. Although the great news is that it's getting easier with technology, with AI especially. So why not simply, you know, make yourself go on AI every day and ask a question? I mean, I know that sounds simplistic, but I said it earlier. If you don't ask the right questions, you don't get the right answers. So what I do is literally, I mean, many times a day, I'm just checking online at the news websites. I've got some key sources that I use for economics, such as trading economics. These are data sources, but it keeps me on top of just, some information. But it's not possible to have, everything at your fingertips. But I think what we've got to do is learn how to use technology to make us more efficient and more productive in accessing information. And I think people would be pleasantly surprised how quickly they can grasp what is happening around them. And of course, with that information, I would absolutely encourage everybody, allow your teams to discuss these issues. The old model of top down, management is gone. It's now flat organizations. Let your teams, have a bottom up approach. Let your teams discuss the sort of questions that I've raised already. The what, the so what, the now what, and I think you'll be pleasantly surprised.
Just on that, I think a lot of people would say, like, funnily enough, on the weekend, I was having a conversation with somebody who's in the public sector, and they were saying it's far more hierarchical. They found, having moved from the corporate sector in the corporate world, which I found quite fascinating, actually. Do you think that's something that we're going to see a big shift in then? Because hierarchy is still there, absolutely, in the corporate world. Or do you think that's something that could be on the horizon, more flat approach to how we run companies?
Well, I think it has to be on the horizon, and
Hmm.
I'll tell you why I think that. Uh, we have a new generation has emerged in the last 15 years called Generation Alpha. I say emerged. I mean, it's a it's, we don't have demarcation lines, but since March 2010, when the iPad was launched, children born since then are now digital natives. They are the true digital natives. And if we think of them going through time, you know, they're now 15, 16, some of them. Uh, they'll very soon enter the workforce. They'll become employees. And I think their attitude will be very different from my attitude when I was young. The hierarchical approach, the yes sir, no sir, etc. I think that's going rapidly, and I think generations since my younger generation uh, now expect to be listened to. They expect to be much more involved in decision making, because if they're not involved, if they're not listened to, they will move. They will go elsewhere where they are appreciated. So I know I've jumped from one subject to another subject here, now into demographics, but it's very important to realize this, that, the past will not reflect the future. Uh, I'm not a futurologist. I haven't got a crystal ball to predict the future. But, I think we all recognize that the pace of change is picking up. Uh, People's attitudes are changing. Workers' attitudes are changing. Consumers' attitudes are changing. And therefore, it's important that management, leadership recognize that doing what they've always done is not sustainable.
Yes, I had read actually some of the work that you've done around Generation Alpha, and I think you've even suggested they'll be better off, definitely more specialized, I think, from memory, and very demanding, if you like, around how they learn, how they're employed, I guess. Um, I think that would be quite frightening for a lot of the people listening, in terms of how they prepare, because uncertainty is not good for business, and yet that we're plunged into a world where uncertainty is everywhere, including now from our new employees coming through the ranks. So again, is there any guidance you might give, having observed this generation, how they behave and the likelihoods of how they will morph into if you like, the stage of corporate world? How can they prepare for that shift in workplace expectations?
Well, first of all, sir, we actually don't know how they're going to behave because they're still very young. So, as I said earlier, predicting the future is very difficult. And so, none of us know. Let's be clear, none of us know. So, I'm simply raising the question, uh, do you think your next generation of customers, your next generation of employees, do you think they will behave in the same way as the previous generation? That's a question. Now, my view is they won't. The Generation Alpha, again, we are speculating, so let me stress that. But they're often described as the generation with the 10-second attention span. No, they want instant responses. That their patience will be much shorter than perhaps previous generations. And I'm sure you've all seen on television the little child, swiping the TV and saying, "Mum, the television isn't working." Uh, you know, it's a different world. But in terms of leadership and the challenges for managing organizations with this future generation, I think it's going to be very important that you know how to attract these people as employees and as customers, how to retain them, how to motivate them as employees. The idea of somebody joining a company and working for 40 years in the same job is almost unthinkable, even today, by the way. But for the next generation, I think it'll be absolutely unthinkable. So how are you going to motivate and retain and attract these people? Well, I think work has and will become even more a series of projects, moving from project to project to project to keep them motivated because of the 10-second, the cliche, the 10-second attention span. And at the same time, of course, I think the employees of the future are going to be much, much more aware of issues such as sustainability, in terms of brand, in terms of trust. They're going to be much more critical of their employers. They'll be more willing to leave, and as customers as well, they'll be more challenging, more questioning, and that's a good thing. I think that's yeah, that, I welcome those changes because hopefully it'll be a better world.
Yeah, I think we've spoken a lot about trust on the podcast in different ways, whether that's as a leader with your employees or with your customers, as you say. I think don't traditionally think of that as a macroeconomic subject. But I am wondering, have you, because I know you've consulted widely with different organizations, I know that you are somewhat global in the truest sense, really, because you've had visiting professorial appointments in different countries, anything from Germany to Ghana. So I just wondered your perspective on that, really.
Gosh, well, it is beyond my pay scale. Thank you for implying that, Sarah. Uh, but let me some immediate thoughts that come to mind. It's really a question for leaders listening to this today. How long does it take to build up a brand? How long does it take to build up trust in your brand and your organization? I think we'll all agree it takes a very long time. Well, how long would it take to lose that trust? How long would it take to lose the loyalty of customers and employees? I think that takes very, very little time today because today the world is connected. The internet has killed distance. So whatever you're doing, you know, it's now visible. I often hear, well, companies say, we didn't realize that in that country they were doing certain things that aren't acceptable, but they're part of our supply chain, but we didn't know about it. That's no longer an excuse. You have to be aware of what's happening in your supply chain. And so I just make the point again. It takes a long time to build up trust. It can take seconds to lose trust. Uh, and again, let me give you a hypothetical example. Imagine a little boy or a little girl in a factory in another country with a smartphone, and all his or their friends are working in the factory, making a product, with a particular brand on it. And they say, smile, you're on camera. Well, in a few seconds, press a button, that's in the cloud. What could happen to that brand? Well, with children working in a factory, that brand will be destroyed and should be destroyed very quickly. So I think this word trust is not something I take lightly. In fact, I think it's incredibly important. But how do you build up that trust? Well, you do it by your actions. You have to be visibly doing it. And I know that isn't easy. I totally get that.
And I think one of the things that's sort of come up time and time again is something like sustainability and promoting sustainability as being really quite a risky topic for leaders and companies because, they're being accused of greenwashing and sort of very negative connotations around a subject which is really supposed to be organizations, yes, maintaining profitability, but promoting sustainability. So just thinking around that, because I know it's something that you've looked at, what challenges perhaps do leaders face in implementing sustainable practices so that they can carry on being profitable and not breach trust and all of the things we've just talked about?
Sir, I don't want to give the impression I'm an expert in sustainability because I'm not. We're all, being impacted by this. And my simple answer is, I think it's very difficult to achieve this balance. It's what's often called a paradox for businesses in both being sustainable and profitable. Uh, but it's a paradox that we have to meet head on. I don't think there's as Marks and Spencer's had a phrase, there's no plan B. There only is one plan, and that is being sustainable and, of course, being profitable. Now, I am hoping, as I say, I don't admit to being an expert in this at all, but I believe and I'm hoping that being sustainable can be profitable and will be profitable. But being unsustainable is definitely not the way forward, because then we all lose out. So I've given you a very glib answer simply because I don't feel I'm qualified to give you a more detailed answer, except to say there is no plan B.
I think let's focus then on your expertise, the macroeconomics perspective.
Yeah.
What emerging economic trends can leaders really focus on, or should they be really focused on in, say, the next? I mean, this is a really big question, but it's one that you know best about over, say, the next decade.
Yeah. I was about to say it is a really big question, and I hope you've got a few hours to spare
We
for
have.
this
We're all good.
podcast. Yeah. Look, there are so many points I would want to make here, but let me try and focus on, five or six of the big ones. I believe what we're seeing in real time is a fundamental change in the balance of power across the world. The balance of power, I use the phrase changing spheres of influence. Post Second World War, the US has been the dominant power. Then along came the European Union in 1957, and it is a major power in the world. And of course, in the last 30 years, we've seen the emergence of China as well. But this power balance is changing fundamentally, literally, as we talk today, and we're well aware of what's happening in terms of tariffs and the impact of President Trump on the world. So I think that's not going to suddenly end. I think this is the beginning of a continuing change in the balance of power. But at the same time, of course, we have a lot of countries that are emerging, becoming more important, more impactful. We used to talk about the BRICS economies: Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. A few of those BRICS haven't done very well. But now we talk about the mint economies, the future, big emerging economies of Mexico, Indonesia, Nigeria, and Turkey. It doesn't mean they'll all be successful just because we're talking about them, but they have the potential. Then another trend that I've been looking at for quite a while is the I think it's the unprecedented explosion in demand globally for public sector services. And I don't just mean the UK, and public sector services as well as health services. This is a global phenomenon. It also embraces education, by the way. We're seeing increases in expenditure, increase in demand for services, even tap water on a scale we've never seen before. And that changes the world. But with all these emerging markets I mentioned, we're also seeing the consumer landscape change fundamentally. We're seeing hundreds of millions of more people entering the so-called middle income status. And what that means is there are more people who can buy the things that you and I can buy. Of course, that also brings challenges for the environment, for the circular economy, for sustainability. I absolutely agree with that. And then I mentioned, education being a trend, but of course the demographic changes are fundamental. We have the so-called developed world getting older and declining. So, for example, Japan has a declining population and an aging population. But in many other countries, particularly in Africa, in the developing countries, we're seeing populations still rising and getting younger, which is quite a contrast. And people, not surprisingly, want to improve their living standards, their lifestyles. I mentioned already technological connectivity. The internet has killed distance, absolutely. But at the same time, and again, I won't go on too much longer, but there's then the change as a result of AI and robotics, fundamentally changing the way we work, the way we communicate. And hopefully it will make us much more efficient and productive in our work. And then, of course, we have the emergence every year, but I think there's much more to come in the next 10 years, the emergence of new players and new brands, companies we don't even know about yet. If I were to go back to 1998 and ask you what Amazon was, well, it was a bookseller, by post. If I ask you what Amazon is today, well, it's the world's biggest retailer in a very short time period. It's remarkable what they've done. And so, my last, point regarding the main drivers of change, I think the most successful companies of the next 10 years will be those that embrace technology, embrace these changes I've mentioned, and who make what seems very complex to most of us, who make it seem very simple. If I take Amazon as an example, click, click, click. It's incredible what they do. They've made a very complex buying decision or operation very, very simple, even for me. And I'm a big fan of it personally. So, Sarah, I've thrown lots of points out there regarding, the big trends that are going to shape the decade for leaders. But I hope it's given them some food for thought.
Yeah, and I think what I'm hearing a lot about, obviously, is and you've been very outspoken about China's projected dominance by 2050. I believe that you've been looking at as a time frame. But you've also called India the quiet giant. And I was really interested to hear, I mean, it was one of the points you've just raised. So perhaps you could elaborate a little bit more on that for us.
Well, let me first of all go back to China because it's a very important point to note. I've been studying China for a very long time, not in detail, but in terms of their culture and general trends. Uh, China, the mentality of Chinese is long term. They think long term. And by the way, I think it's incredibly smart to think long term. At the moment, we're seeing a lot of countries such as USA thinking very short term, in my opinion. But China is heavily investing and lending money to African countries because of long term trade relationships. I think it's very, very smart. And then I think for the next 20 years or 30 years, I would keep an eye on India for a particular reason. Uh, India's got the biggest population in the world, but they're also massively investing in education. People in India cry out for more education. I haven't got a number to prove this, but I understand that the number of PhDs graduating in India every year is more than the number in the whole of the European Union. Now that may be wrong, but it's probably correct. It's probably very likely. So in terms of the future talent pool, and we're seeing it already, by the way, I think India is going to be a major, major player. Uh, and at the moment, globally, they're probably the fastest growing economy in the world. Certainly much faster than any European economy or any G7 country, and faster than China. So I think, it is a volume game, but it's also an education game. So it's a numbers game and an education game. And I think, people in India, are quietly coming along. And I admire that, by the way. They're not shouting about it. So I think I call it the quiet giant.
And on the shouting, you did touch as well on the short term perspective that you think is um, how you would describe what's going on with the US approach. What did you mean by that? Perhaps elaborate a bit more on that for us, because obviously all eyes are on that at the moment. So,
Yeah, in very simple terms, putting tariffs on imports from your major trading partners, I think, is very short sighted and very short term. Uh, Instead of working together and discussing our problems and finding a way forward, I don't think slapping tariffs of 25% here and there is the correct strategy. Of course, the danger is it will lead to a trade war, a tit for tat retaliation. And I have a point I want to make regarding this. Uh, it's short term, but sadly, I think the people who suffer most are not those in the advanced economies, but those in the poorest countries, because they also suffer from a rise in global prices, and I think is not a welcome development. So short term, in the sense that, as I said earlier, it's better to talk about your problems and to come to a peaceful or a friendly settlement. But I think tat for tat, or retaliation is not a good strategy. And we've lived in this part of the world with US as our main trading partner, and ally in many other ways, along with Europe. I think that the current decisions being made by Donald Trump are upsetting the post-war stability that we've enjoyed, and I think that's short term. I really don't appreciate that at all. It is dangerous. I don't want to say more than that, because I think there's a danger of making people feel very nervous. But so, from an economic perspective, throughout my life, globalization has opened up trade to countries. It has liberated hundreds of millions of people from eating only one meal a day. it has raised living standards of literally hundreds of millions of people. And that's been great news. And the world economy has grown ever since the Second World War. I think the danger is deglobalization and, inshoring and bring back into domestic production. Thinking of your own country rather than other countries, trading partners, I think is dangerous for the future of the world economy. And of course, there are other dangers associated with politics as well.
I think your work emphasizes strategic thinking, management, in particular in management development. And I'm thinking that sort of strategic approach obviously is something you've said you value in the way you can observe what's going on in China and India. So just from a strategy perspective, I think what you've just said is this isn't something you can see is a strong strategy or one that's likely to end well.
No, I think it's a mistake. I really do. I'd rather talk to my enemies than fight my enemies. That's a bad cliche, but it's better being inside the tent than outside the tent. The old cliches are the best. Uh, and I think it's been the post Second World War consensus. We've had so many organizations formed since the Second World War that has enabled us to talk to each other. But I think these reactions, these actions and then reactions, I think are dangerous and destabilizing. And I don't think countries will forget quickly, some of these decisions that are being made right now.
Right. Obviously, my listeners are generally CEOs, general counsel, they're leaders of business. But from their perspective, I mean, I think we've seen it reported that the US stock exchange lost 4 trillion or something in the last few weeks. So, how can they? I mean, it's very difficult in such volatile. I mean, business loves certainty. We hear that all the time, and now business is massively uncertain. So, you've already said to embrace technology, adapt, change, but this is a different ballgame, isn't it? Because they don't know how their supply chains are going to be impacted, all of these things. So how how can they try and anchor in such a volatile time? Because you've seen it all over the last 40 years and you've followed it closely from an analytical perspective. So what I mean, obviously we can talk about the pitfalls they face, but what can they do in a positive sense?
Well, Sarah, again, I apologize. I don't have the pat answer, the simple answer, and I don't think anybody has.
You're probably as close as we'll get.
I think the reality is we're going to have to, hunker down. Don't panic. That's for sure. We will get through this. Uh, Sadly, it will be survival of the fittest, but the fittest doesn't mean the biggest or the strongest. That's the famous Charles Darwin phrase, And I'll go back to my very first point. It's about adapting and adjusting. Again, it sounds like full of cliches, but I mean this as a helpful comment. Don't stand still. Don't wait for the train to hit you. Get off the railway track, whatever that means in your context. For example, imagine you are reliant on a single product or a single customer. Uh, you know, if that's your core business, if you lose your core, you're out of business. You're in the corporate graveyard. But are you consciously getting your teams to think about what I often call passion products or passion services? What else are you experimenting with, which may be very marginal, experimental, may not make you any money, but some of them may become your next core business. So are you relying on your core, or are you actually looking for your next core and the one after that and the one after that? It could be customers, it could be products, it could be services, but standing still is not the answer. You've got to think critically about what are you doing, why you're doing it, and how can you do it better.
I think that's fantastic advice. And I think I've heard you say that you've loved spending such a wonderful career in such an exciting environment. And I know you've said you're lucky and described yourself like that. But I think, isn't it that agility and not standing still that's, I think, the hallmark of what I've observed you've achieved and so much and not just in obviously your strengths are in the global economic trends, but you've done so much work for charity as well, and you've made a very personal impact.
Well, I say I've been very lucky.
If you had to pick one thing, though, in terms of something you feel most proud of, what would you sort of fixate on? I know.
Wow, that's a huge question. Goodness me. Well, I think my 2 years in Ghana. Uh, well, the most proud of, that's probably the wrong answer. That's what impacted my life most. Uh, in terms of my work, you know, and there are several things that are in my head, but and I'll try and pick one. I'm very proud of the fact that I've taught every MBA student in Cranfield since 1984. I think that has given me a lot of joy because many of them have gone on to become major figures in business, CEOs of organizations. I won't mention any, by the way, because I'll embarrass them, but CEOs of major organizations. I feel really proud of that. I met a number of them last week at an event in London when Cranfield gave me. It was wonderful. I was given the 2025 Distinguished Alumnus Award because I did my PhD at Cranfield, and there we had on my right hand side was a former ambassador, one of my former students, and the former chairman of a major retailer. I won't mention another CEO, a knight of the realm of another major computer software company, all retired by the way, and I'm still working. But yeah, I'm very proud of what my students and the people I've worked with, what they've achieved, and because that's I've had one very small part to contribute to their success. That's been wonderful.
In fact, I think I read that you said that you enjoy the stimulation of engaging with top class minds and helping others reach their potential. And I was thinking from a mentorship perspective, that's something I'm asked about a lot from leaders around how to develop the next generation. And obviously, you've touched on your thoughts around Generation Alpha in this conversation. But what would be your tips? Because you're obviously incredibly good at it, especially given what you've just shared with us about your former students. What would you recommend that leaders focus on when they're trying to mentor or develop people?
Wow. Uh, Gosh, I don't know the answer to that question because I'm not an expert in developing leadership skills. But in my own case, just my own experience, I think talking to people, I've got a habit, and maybe I do it too much, knocking on doors, going on Teams, going on Zoom. I think what I don't do is stay in my office and hope that the door isn't opened. I'm very much a people person. And I think that's wonderful. I mean, I'm not saying I'm not wonderful, but I think it's a characteristic that has certainly helped me to develop myself without even knowing it. Uh, so I think that's critically important. Whatever level you're at the very highest level, go down and talk to people. And I'm sure, of course, the people listening all do this, but people appreciate when people talk to them. And I think the danger is that we tend to put our head on the desk and hope all this noise goes away. But yeah, I'm sure everybody listening does exactly what I'm saying, and I'm no expert in this, but I absolutely think talking is good because if you don't talk, then you don't learn.
Yes, and you're very modest because I know that they've even put an MBA scholarship in place to reflect, the amazing contribution you've made at Cranfield. And I've already seen some of the students' comments about how much that has meant to them as people who've been awarded with that. So, I mean, I I think from legacy perspective, I've asked this question of many of the people who've attended, and I think that's a pretty cool legacy to have made an impact on so many students' lives on a person-to-person front. So that's wonderful, in my view. So I I wondered as well about your charitable. I mean, I hadn't realised that you'd written 15 marathons. That's
17 actually,
17. Oh my gosh, out of date. So, I mean, you're crazy, aren't you?
no longer crazy, by the way. I've stopped running marathons about
Well,
five
that's
years
a
ago.
relief. I don't think I could run one if my life depended on it, Joe. So, and at Mount Kilimanjaro, I mean, and you're still doing so much work in Ghana. What's next for you? That's what I was interested to hear.
Wow. Well, the next step should be retirement, but I'm still enjoying what I'm doing. very difficult to know, and I actually don't know the answer. That is the problem. I'm hoping that somebody will tell me what is next because I don't know. Uh, Being here at Cranfield, working with wonderful students and managers from companies all over the world, you know, every week I meet new people. They challenge me, and that's been wonderful. And one lesson I've learned, by the way, over many years is, and it's a very important lesson. If you don't know the answer, then tell them you don't know the answer. You may have heard me say that several times during this conversation. Uh, People do not respect you if you pretend to know the answer, and I've learned that over the years. So, and by working with these MBA students and managers, I've learned that lesson. If you don't know the answer, say you don't know the answer, but let's have a conversation about it. So, what's next? I don't know. That's the answer. That's your question.
There's something next there, isn't it? I can tell. You're not ready to hang up your teaching yet, I don't think.
No, not at all.
So one of the questions that I have been asking everybody's attended, and I'm super interested to hear your response to this, is if you were to create a leader's survival kit, what 3 essential items would you include and why?
Wow. Well, I was going to give you a glib answer, and I think I still will give you a glib answer. I'm going to repeat what I said earlier. I'm going to remind you of what I said about Rolf et al. Earlier, the reflective thinking, because I use it a lot, and it helps me a great deal in thinking through complex situations. And 3 questions are what, so what, and now what. I think everybody listening today, if you were to take that away and use it in your team debates, your team meetings, I think you'll be pleasantly surprised how productive that little framework can be. I didn't create it, sadly, but using it is what's important. I didn't create the hammer, but I use a hammer. So, it's what you do with it that matters. And so that would be my key, if that's 1 or 3, my key takeaway today. But I guess on top of that, I would absolutely repeat what I said earlier. Talk to everybody, talk to your people. I'm sure you do that anyway. But when in the midst of this uncertainty, in the midst of the current economic challenges, it's so easy to put the head on the desk, I said earlier, and keep hitting your targets. But I've never done the following. But if your nose is firmly planted on the desk, focusing on targets, the question is, what if they're the wrong targets? I've never fired a missile to the moon. But if you're wrong by 1 degree, you'll miss it by many thousands of kilometers. So let's take our nose off the desk, look up, look out, and let's start planning ahead. Again, it sounds very glib, but I think it's very important. Targets are critical, by the way, but you've got to ask the question, are these the right targets? Are we going in the right direction? And I suspect many companies are not going in the right direction. What evidence for that? Well, when COVID happened, there was a shock to the system. How many companies are no longer with us today because they thought their existing model would be sustainable, would be maintained. And of course, that wasn't true for all of them.
So, to recap, what, so what, and now what?
And now what?
Professor Joe Nellis, it's been an absolute joy. Thank you so much for joining us. Brilliant conversation and some fantastic tips there for my listeners. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Sarah. Most enjoyable. Thank you.
That's it for today's episode of Insights from the Coalface, Elevating Leadership Beyond the Boardroom. I hope this conversation left you with fresh insights, new perspectives, and a deeper connection to the challenges and opportunities of leadership. If you found value in today's discussion, I'd love for you to share it with your network, leave a review, or reach out to me with your thoughts. Leadership can be a lonely road, but it doesn't have to be. Let's keep learning, growing, and supporting each other. Until next time, stay resilient, stay authentic, and keep leading with purpose.